In a new town nestled among forested hills, Jamal Roberts, a seasoned police officer with 2 decades under his belt, was about to begin his latest journey. He had joined the Briarwood Police Department as the first black police chief in the town's history, a landmark decision that had already stirred whispers and speculation among the townsfolk and his future colleagues. Jamal understood that his arrival in this tight-knit, conservative community came with its challenges, but he welcomed the chance to make a difference. As he drove his familiar SUV down a winding rural road, Jamal allowed himself a moment of reflection. The tranquil scenery was a stark contrast to the urban intensity he'd been accustomed to. And while the calm was refreshing, he couldn't shake the feeling that this move would come with unique trials. He'd left his big city job not out of frustration, but from a sense of duty, a belief that his experience might be more impactful in a place ripe for change and growth. The decision to leave had been bittersweet, as his old team respected him as a mentor and a leader, but he was never one to stay still when a new challenge called. As he mused on the path ahead, he noticed a patrol car closing in from behind. He figured they were probably in a hurry and pulled slightly to the side to let them pass. But the patrol car didn't pass. Instead, it weaved in close, swerving aggressively as if to intimidate him. Jamal's heart quickened. This wasn't just unprofessional. It was dangerous. He glanced over at the car as it leveled with his, catching sight of 2 officers laughing and making comments to each other. To them, he was just a stranger on their road, someone unfamiliar and easy to target. Remaining calm, Jamal took a deep breath and continued driving, choosing not to react. After all, he dealt with difficult situations before, and he understood that sometimes patience was his greatest asset. But the patrol car didn't ease up. They tailed him closely, repeatedly cutting in front of him and then backing off, as though they were taunting him. He considered revealing his identity, but he knew that doing so here, at this moment, might only escalate things. Instead, he decided to observe, to gauge just what kind of behavior he might be dealing with in this new environment. As they approached a deserted stretch of road, the officers ramped up their antics. Jamal's frustration grew, yet he held his composure, reminding himself that he was here to lead by example. But his patience was wearing thin. Finally, hoping to avoid further provocation, he pulled onto the shoulder to let them pass. The patrol car slowed to a stop next to him, and both officers stepped out. The younger officer sauntered up to Jamal's window with a cocky smile, tapping on the glass. "License, please," he demanded, with a mocking edge in his voice. Jamal handed it over without a word, his jaw set as he met the officer's gaze. The officer smirked as he looked over the license, adding, "Nice car. Bit flashy for someone like you, don't you think?" His partner, hanging back, chuckled as if they were sharing a private joke. Suppressing a surge of irritation, Jamal replied evenly, "I wasn't speeding. Is there a problem?" The younger officer's expression hardened. "Problem? I decide if there's a problem. Folks like you think you can just roll in and take over." He sneered, revealing a glimpse of the hostility simmering beneath his teasing demeanor. Jamal clenched the steering wheel tightly. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. A test of his resolve on his first day, no less. He wanted to respond, to stand up for himself. Yet he knew his reaction could become the talk of the town by morning. His instincts told him to stay calm, to watch and learn, but the disrespect was blatant. Choosing to de-escalate, Jamal gave a brief nod and asked calmly, "Is there anything specific you're looking for?" His restraint only seemed to provoke them further, as the older officer stepped closer, throwing a condescending look his way. "You think you're special?" he muttered. "You think you're just going to come here and change things?" This wasn't just an act of petty aggression. It was a warning. These officers clearly felt their authority was unchallengeable, viewing Jamal not as a respected colleague or even a leader, but as an unwelcome outsider. As the officers continued their mocking routine, Jamal resolved to remain steady. He knew he'd have to address this behavior in the coming days, but now was not the time for a confrontation. He was here to lead, and that meant taking the higher road, no matter how rough it got. Without another word, Jamal allowed them to finish their spectacle, mentally preparing himself for the work ahead. The road forward was going to be difficult. filled with unspoken prejudices and resistance. Yet as he drove on, leaving the officers behind, he knew that he would handle it. Because change was exactly what he'd come here to bring, no matter how uncomfortable it made others. Jamal Roberts could feel the situation teetering on the edge. He wanted to end the officer's immature display by simply identifying himself, making it clear that he was their superior. But he held back, choosing not to escalate. Instead, he stayed calm, responding evenly that he hadn't broken any laws and asking if he could continue on his way. But his composure seemed to annoy them further. They intensified their mockery, as if daring him to lose his temper. Jamal considered his options. He knew he had the authority to demand respect and bring swift consequences if necessary. Revealing his role as their incoming chief would undoubtedly shut down their behavior. Yet, he felt that this moment could serve a different purpose, a test of his own restraint and perhaps an insight into the deeper issues within the department. So he chose not to reveal his rank, opting instead to show them the dignity that they lacked. Sitting in his car, Jamal felt a mix of anger and sorrow. For 20 years, he'd worked hard to lead with integrity, putting justice above all else. Yet here he was, facing petty, unprovoked hostility from those who would soon report to him. This behavior hinted at a troubling culture, one where bias and power games seemed all too common. As much as he wanted to confront them, he knew that, as the new chief, he had to set a different example. Taking a steady breath, he kept his replies calm and neutral, carefully choosing his words to avoid confrontation. After a few more attempts to rattle him, the officers began to lose interest, sensing they couldn't provoke him. Jamal's calm resilience had deflated their game, and they finally backed off, leaving him to continue on his way. Though the incident had left a mark, Jamal felt relieved that he'd kept his composure. This encounter had revealed his true challenge, building a department where respect and equality weren't just expected but ingrained. The next morning, Jamal arrived at the Briarwood Police Department, where he would be formally introduced as the new chief. The building was simple, a modest space where officers bustled about, handling paperwork and chatting among themselves. Word of his appointment had circulated, but many hadn't yet met him in person. As he entered the briefing room, Jamal immediately spotted the two officers from the day before. Recognition flickered in their eyes, quickly replaced by surprise and discomfort as they realized the significance of their actions. Jamal walked past them without a glance, taking his place at the head of the table. Tension filled the room as the officers watched him, sizing up their new chief and wondering what kind of leader he would be. Jamal waited, letting the silence emphasize the weight of the moment. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and powerful, carrying an unmistakable sense of purpose. In his address, Jamal outlined the core values he intended to instill: respect, integrity, and accountability. He shared some of his background, explaining how he'd spent years upholding justice and protecting the community, treating everyone with fairness, no matter their background. Without explicitly mentioning the previous day's events, he stressed the importance of respect, not just as a departmental rule, but as the foundation of ethical policing. He made it clear that any failure to uphold these values was not just a breach of protocol, but a betrayal of the department's mission. His words were clear, yet unthreatening. He didn't need to raise his voice or make grand promises. His presence conveyed his resolve. Glancing at the two officers from the day before, Jamal allowed a momentary pause, subtly reminding them that he hadn't forgotten. They averted their eyes, visibly uncomfortable, realizing their behavior had been both seen and noted. Jamal's approach left them with a clear message. In this department, there would be no room for prejudice or arrogance. Over the following weeks, Jamal's balanced yet firm leadership started to take effect. Officers noticed his commitment to fairness and his quiet but unyielding dedication to respect, which gradually fostered an environment of trust. Even those who had initially doubted him, including the two officers, began to shift their behavior, realizing that Jamal wasn't there to enforce power, but to build a community grounded in equality and responsibility. Though change came slowly, Jamal's approach became a model for the kind of transformation the town needed. His influence extended beyond mere rules. He showed by example that leadership was about standing firm in one's values, not imposing authority through intimidation. For Jamal, it was only the beginning of a journey that would shape the future of Briarwood's police department. A mission not to conquer, but to inspire. With each passing day, Jamal continued to guide his team, understanding that justice wasn't achieved overnight, but through persistent, principled action. His work was far from done, but he knew he was making strides toward building a legacy of dignity, respect, and unwavering character. The road ahead might still hold challenges, but Jamal was ready to face them, prepared to lead his team by the strength of his conviction and the depth of his integrity.